Good morning. Welcome to this webinar presented by CIIC, the Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative. My name is John O'Shaughnessy. I am here today as a member of the CIIC Steering Committee, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by two very good friends and fellow CIIC Steering Committee members, Pat Dinneen, joining us from Boston, and Matt Zieger, who is beaming in from Washington, D.C. First of all, CIIC is a non-incorporated global network of Catholic impact investors seeking to expand the practice of impact investing among Catholic institutions. We are a peer-to-peer network where investors ask questions, share advice, learn from each other as we work to increase the positive impacts of our investments. But it's also to navigate how we do that practically and with integrity and responsibility. One way to say it is we are truly a Catholic community of practice around impact investing. So if you're not so familiar with CIIC, please check us out, our website at catholicimpact.org. If you go to the bottom of the page and you're not already receiving updates, you can indicate add and enroll just to get updates at the bottom of that page. So we welcome you to do that. Check us out, all the things that we're doing. But today we're here to talk about the third Vatican Impact Investing Conference that took place last week in Rome. Pat, Matt, and myself and other CIIC participants attended, and we'll spend the next 57 minutes or so sharing what we witnessed during those 3 days. So let's do a quick outline. Let's look at our quick outline here for what we'll do in these exceeding minutes. Okay, in a second, we'll really begin in earnest with prayer. And then Pat's going to cover the evolution quickly on Vatican Impact Investing Conference and Catholic Impact Investing a bit to help frame things. And then Matt, who was one of the persons who helped sit on the committee to plan the conference, will talk about format and focus. And that will give you sort of an idea of what it looked like to be there. Then each of us will take a few moments to spotlight some of those key moments, key people, some of the key takeaways that we found ourselves that we wanted to share with you today. Then we're going to talk about implications for Catholic investors and also CIIC. What are the implications for CIIC? And talk about that. And then we hope to have left at least 15 minutes, if not 20, to address your questions, any questions that you have. But please don't delay. If you have any questions that's coming up as we move along, just go down to the Q&A icon on the bottom of your page, put your question in, and we'll line them up to talk about those there towards the tail end of our time. All right. But before we go any further, let's begin with prayer like we always do for anything, any gathering, any conversation that we have with CIIC. We begin with prayer. And I'd like to just read today's gospel from Matthew. This just touched me, and I thought it was a great way to begin our time. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden light." So Lord, when I read this today, it was just like, wow, there's so much need in the world. There's so much urgency. And in the midst of all that, as we face that together, it's like we have you there. We can lean on you. We can sort of feel your presence in us, among us. And that's so comforting. So bless us that way, Lord. Thank you for that first. Bless our time, these next several minutes. Each person who is tuning in, bless them. Guide our steps and help us more than anything to be aware of your presence and connect to your Holy Spirit that is living and moving among us. And we ask all this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so let's move right into it. Pat, let's turn it over to you. little bit about the evolution of Catholic Impact and the Vatican conferences.
So thanks very much, John and Matt. And can you hear me?
Very well.
All right. So impact investing is not new to the Catholic Church. It started way back in the 15th century with hospitals and schools, but it wasn't called impact investing in those days. And so our first convocation was in 2014 at the Vatican, private audience with Pope Francis, statement endorsing impact investing for the Catholic Church. The title of the first conference, Investing for the Poor, How Impact Investing Can Serve the Common Good in Light of Evangelii Gaudium. And the timing was perfect. It was right after the Pope issued his Joy of the Gospels exhortation. It was a path-breaking convocation because in the tradition of the Catholic Church, it was really focused on donations and grants. So this was really an attempt to question very candidly whether or not this is something that was appropriate for the Catholic Church to embrace fully as yet another tool to serve the poor. And lots of questions about what is impact investing, why is it relevant to the Catholic Church, way beyond just socially responsible investing, do no harm, avoiding sin stocks, but actually investing in sustainable businesses. How does it relate to Catholic social teaching? Should we proceed? These were really very fundamental questions that we were raising at the first convocation. That was only 4 years ago. And I'm happy to say the overwhelming answer was yes, and particularly with the endorsement from Pope Francis. So we did proceed, and as far as I'm concerned, it's not what happens at the conference, but what happens afterwards to put our faith into action. So sure enough, right after the first conference, a number of us went from the Vatican to the White House, integrated a lot of our excitement and our energy and our commitments with other people of faith and governments and philanthropists, the Global Social Impact Task Force, and we were off and running. So lots of activity globally, webinars, training, fund commitment. So that all led up to the second biennial conference 2 years ago, 2016. And the title of that conference, Making the Year of Mercy a Year of Impact for the Poor. So again, timing was very good as Pope Francis had just announced the Year of Mercy. So this conference, unlike the first one where we were really questioning whether or not it was really appropriate for the Catholic Church, yes, it's appropriate, but now how do we focus on the social enterprises, so the investees? And there were a lot of pre-conference briefings for the bishops, things as simple as what is a balance sheet. And those of you who are on the phone who are CIOs know that it can be pretty complicated, but the bishops loved it. There was a 2-day conference. And as a result of that second conference, more capacity building, more training, and regional initiatives. So we really saw a flowering of regional initiatives all over the world, but particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America. And in CRS, I'm happy to tell you as a board member, our board voted to allocate a certain proportion of our reserve fund. We've made several investments, all leading up to what happened last week. As John said, we all came together. The title of this third conference, Scaling Investment in Service of Integral Human Development. And those of you who know Catholic social teaching will recognize the term integral human development. It's part of a total, every investment has an impact. We want to focus on positive impact. So this time, it's time for action. We've had the capacity building, the webinars, the training, the questioning of what our role is. Now it's time for action. And the real purpose and the evolution of this conference was as we started and ended with commitment forms. Everybody was handed a commitment form as part of their registration. You'll be hearing more about that. Lots of shared examples. We're getting permission from people to list all those commitments on the website. Hopefully it will motivate other people. And this time we had many more chief finance officers, chief investment officers, members of the institutional private investment community, as well as government officials. Lots of energy and high hopes for changing the world. So now let's see. There are also evolving other groups, not just our group, but there have been multiple other conferences at the Vatican or with Vatican support. So I like to think of this as we do at CIIC as a movement. That's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to hand back to Matt to tell you a little bit more about the format and structure.
Thanks so much, Pat. That was a great introduction. And I want to give all of you just a little snapshot into the design and framing of the conference. Again, my name is Matt Zieger. I lead impact investing for Catholic Charities USA and also do a fair amount of work in social enterprise and also have the privilege of serving on this the Catholic Impact Investing Steering Committee with my fellow panelists here. And we had a really wonderful time at the conference. And so we want to kind of let you into how it was structured and really as you think about action steps that you might even be able to take with us in this work, that you can see opportunities to do that. So before we get into the takeaways and all of that, I want to spend a few minutes kind of walking through the framing of the conference. And for me, there were two key frameworks that I think are important to leave you with here. The main conference themes were organized around these impact areas. So if you look at all of the agenda items and the structure of the speakers and much of the breakout sessions, there were these four areas that were kind of the consistent themes. Healthcare access for the poor, employment, social enterprise, and really a particular focus on youth in that work, for the unemployed and underemployed youth in many markets around the world. The idea of walking in solidarity with migrants and refugees, and in particular in how to finance small and medium enterprises and other infrastructure that helps them build livelihoods in new communities. And then Laudato Si and climate change and development and all of the work that the church and affiliate organizations are doing in environmental issues. And if you have a few minutes, I want to, even during this or after this event, take some time to go to the conference website itself. There's a lot of information about the agenda, the attendees, that can help you really get a sense of a little bit about the conversation that was had there and to give you a sense of who participated in those conversations. The second key area was, I think, framed up well by the first plenary session discussion, which was titled Across the Returns Continuum, and was led by Matt Bannock of Omidyar Network, who was also a sponsor of the conference, but also someone who's been obviously a long-time supporter and investor in building the impact investing ecosystem around the world. And so, as all of us know that are in the impact investing space, that not all investments are created equal and that not all investors are created equal. And so when we look at this continuum, it was a helpful framework, I think, to understand where people are seeing themselves in this market. So on one hand, you have these commercial rate investors on the A1 side of this, on the left-hand side of this chart, that are really only interested in market-tested, high-return investments. And on the other end of this spectrum, you have philanthropic investors that may be very concessionary in their returns, willing to forgo all of their capital if they see it have a catalytic impact on the issue that they're working to address. But I think what was important for really the action point of this work was that many of us sit in the middle between those two areas, that many of us are trying to build infrastructure and opportunities between those two sides. So I largely think that the value of this conference was really purposely structuring the panels and the content around the issue, not only the issue areas, but also representatives that really were in different places along that spectrum. So you could get a sense of what action is happening, what real funds are being deployed across those different areas across that continuum. So when you look at kind of who was represented, just a little example, you had folks like TPG Rise, which have launched a very large fund, a $2 billion fund, aiming to match their traditional market rate returns in their other funds, in their growth funds that were probably close to 25% at this point. And then you have concessionary investors like MacArthur Foundation that are really using their philanthropic capital to build markets and to build infrastructure. And in every one of those panel areas, every one of those investment areas that we discussed before, you had a good sense of kind of what's happening in the market across that spectrum. And I think it's important to ask the question of, why these areas, why these impact areas. If you look at these themes, they may not be on the forefront of every investor even participating in this conference today. But I think when you look at what the work of the Vatican has been focused on, certainly, and you look at the concerns of the church globally around those that are most vulnerable and poor in the world, these key areas are probably where the most relevant investment is happening to the most poor and vulnerable in pretty much every society across the world, and certainly in the US as well, from our perspective. So we went first to kind of hear what people were working on. And again, those panels were structured across that wide variety of activity. And these are some of the names that were participating. And certainly there were many more, but you have a good sense of that there was a very significant institutional players, both church affiliated and non-church affiliated, that were there really showcasing models that have been working, that have been scaling, that have been creating real impact. And for me, I think those two frameworks helped me understand, that the maturation of the market, and really to Pat's point, how much has really happened over the last few years, both in Catholic institutions and also in the rest of the market, around taking these concepts and really putting them into practice and learning from pilots and models and being able to scale this work in new places around the world. And as we wrapped up that session, I think it's most important to say that we ended every day and we ended every process really focusing on what it means for us and how do we take action with that work. So we had spent a considerable amount of time in small groups, snapshots of how we kind of broke out. We asked ourselves and asked one another, what are gaps in the ecosystem? What are ways that we can take action to actually further both our work and the work of others that are people of goodwill that are trying to invest capital in these issue areas. And so we identified these kind of 5 key themes that wound up being a correlating point that many of us rallied around building an impact portfolio, really practical ways to do that, around finding new partnerships across areas that maybe our own institutions don't have expertise, around internal advocacy to build more kind of full awareness and ownership of impact investing as an opportunity, around this issue of measurement, and particularly around the bottom of the pyramid, how to make sure that we're making the impact that we desire to make. And then to Pat's point, I think back to the earlier conference days, really spending time mentoring both church organizations and enterprises that are able to make impact if only they had the correct business acumen and support wrapped around them. So that's a very brief snapshot that hopefully will give you a sense of where we left. This is the commitment form and some of the sense of some of the commitments that we made. You had organizations like CRS really doubling down, Catholic Relief Services, really doubling down on their work in this space. And you had other investors like USAID and others that were explicit about new commitments they were making because of this conference. So as we wrap that up, I want to turn it back over to, we're going to have a little discussion on key moments and takeaways that we had. So I'm going to turn it back over to John to lead the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, Pat. Yeah, so we thought at this point, after having given you a fairly rich idea of what led up to this third conference, following the first and the second, and then Matt sharing more details of what it was like to be there and many of the people and what went on. We thought it might be good now for each of us to take just 3 or 4 minutes to say, okay, what for us personally, what really stood out? What were one of those two or three key moments, those 2 or 3 key people, and what might be some takeaways from us that we ourselves saw? So I'm going to hand it over back to Pat. Pat, you want to begin with that?
Yes, and it's very much in the spirit of the opening gospel you read. Every day starting with daily mass. and leaving room for the Holy Spirit and reminding us why we were all there. And it wasn't exclusive to Catholics, but it certainly reminds us of our calling from baptism to take care of the poor. So in terms of my takeaways, I'm going to be really candid, and it may sound critical, but I think we're called on to recognize that we've all got to do more. So how did we do on the stated objectives? We had 3 objectives for the conference. And of course, it's too early to know what is going to come from all those objectives. But first of all, to influence capital owners, that's institutions as well as individuals, to use their capital in support of the base of the pyramid, the poorest of the poor. Second objective, to profile investable and blended finance vehicles across those 4 core areas that Matt articulated. And third, garner commitments to action from the participants. Okay, quick assessment. How did we do on the first one? It's too early to tell. But in that conference, arguably billions of capital that can be invested in the poor, but how much of it is it going to the bottom of the pyramid? And that phrase perhaps is very misleading. People who are living in extreme poverty and maybe a little bit above that, very hard to make money. There were very few tangible examples of how you make money at the extreme poverty level. And a number of the institutional investors argued very compellingly that it's a combination of people at the bottom and maybe a little bit above that, but very few examples yet of really profitable, sustainable businesses. And back to the chart that Matt just showed you, across the returns continuum, much easier to do the B and C categories, the non-commercial returns, and the grants. But that doesn't mean we're not going to try to find examples in that A category of sustainable, scalable businesses. And remember the title of the conference year, Scaling Investment. So first objective, not clear. How well, we'll see if those commitments manifest themselves in a large migration of capital to the poor. The second objective, to profile the investable and blended finance vehicles. Well, we had a lot of examples. So I think we get partial credit for achieving that objective. As Matt said, he showed you some of the logos of the people who were represented. We got a good idea, but there were a lot of people missing from the conference. Attendance was severely limited to less than 150 people. And so I think we need to search for a lot more very innovative vehicles. And we're going to come back to this because I think that's an opportunity for CIIC. And then in terms of garnering commitments to action, well, I think we did very well on that one. There were probably about 100 people who got up on the second day at various times during the conference to announce commitments. Tangible commitments, they had thought it through, people took it seriously. We're trying to get permission now from everybody who spoke to list those commitments on the website, so hopefully you will be seeing those and it will inspire those of you on the call today to make commitments as well. And I think that moving forward, there will be opportunities, hopefully through CIIC, to work together on some of these early commitments. In terms of the second takeaway, that was my quick assessment of how we did on the objectives. I think there was a consensus about making commitments across the spectrum. But, and again, here's an opportunity for CIIC. No consensus on what returns are appropriate, what benchmarks for each of those A, B, C categories. No consensus on how to create sustainable businesses for people at the bottom of the pyramid. No consensus on how to measure outcomes. much easier to measure outputs, but very difficult to measure outcomes, especially across sectors. And then I think one of the issues that I take very seriously is how to implement these blended finance vehicles. No consensus, still early days. We need to find and document the success stories. And again, opportunity for CIIC, we'll come back to that. I think that one of the other takeaways for me, and I really opened up my mind on this, there are some compelling reasons to remember that not all problems can be solved by commercial capital. And there's some compelling reasons for that B category, the sub-commercial investments. Things like supporting pioneering new models for new markets, like solar lanterns and building an infrastructure and ecosystem, hedging companies for foreign currency, and promoting policy changes, whether it has to do with private education or government support. So I think there are some compelling reasons on the sub-commercial investments. There were some quotes from some of the participants. One of the institutional investors said that one of his investors complained that he was making too much money for them. That must mean they weren't focusing enough on impact. Well, we need more evidence. Again, CIIC, let's help us, and more evidence that we can do both. Make very attractive returns as well as very meaningful impact and benefits for the people at the bottom of the pyramid. And then I think for me, probably one of the most important announcements as a CRS board member was the Azure project that CRS has been working on for a long time now. This is to provide loans to water service providers in El Salvador so that the poor can have water delivered straight to their homes at less money than they're paying for bottled water. It's a project that has been structured in such a way that it can be scalable and replicable throughout Latin America and hopefully other global economies. There was other mention of farm access. That's farm spelled PHARM. This is safe care for the poor. 46 Catholic hospitals in Kenya, and the banks won't lend to them. So again, an opportunity to convert, pun intended, some of the social programs from CRS and other charities into social enterprises that are scalable and sustainable. And finally, my takeaway, and I'm going to turn back now to Matt and John, but just do something. It doesn't have to be perfect. And at our Taking Action breakout session on the last day, we came up with a lot of lessons learned. You make mistakes, but just do something. We've got an urgent problem with poverty and social justice, immigrants, healthcare, youth, climate. Just do something. Okay, guys, hand back to you.
That's great, Pat. I love your passion about this, and I think, you know, for me, the key takeaway is I wanted to put a face on it because I remember the kind of audible gasp in the room when the story of Lillian Amoke was told by her directly. This young woman first opened up the day in prayer on Tuesday, but also when later in the day she was able to spend some time on stage. And this woman right in front of that picture on the upper left hand corner, she grew up in the Kibera slums, which some of you may know are one of the poorest communities in the entire world in Kenya. And she left life, she explained how she left her home with a few coins that were really the life savings of her and her father. And that accumulated only to about a little under $3. And I remember the gasp from the room. And so it was just such a visceral and an honest story about how impact investing really affects the lives of the poor. And so her story ended with her telling about how she's an Amazon Web Services SysOps admin. So she's a technical programmer and manager of really significant technical work for Digital Divide Data, which is a social enterprise that started a little over a decade ago, but now has affected tens of thousands of young folks like her in communities around the world by helping to build out business models around training and then selling services into the technology industry. And this concept of that talent is not equally distributed, but talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. I think was a good theme around how investment can really kind of find these unserved markets and these underestimated people and communities and create opportunity where there was none before. So with that kind of starting of it, I think that the takeaways, Pat mentioned a couple of them, but I think, for me, I really was reminded about how much we owe to the early movers in this space and how many of those early movers were Catholic institutions, and particularly women religious, taking significant risk and really focusing on this kind of holistic approach to money management, and really understanding that your tithe and your philanthropy doesn't end with that 10%, that you're really dedicating your whole life to this work, and dedicating your full assets to this mission are really crucial as institutions. And so I think, when we looked at many of the stories that were told from the Adrian Dominican Sisters or to Pat Daly and Seamus Finn and the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, all of these institutions I think were really have been incredible movers, incredible innovators in this space. And I think what struck me about this event was that hasn't ended, that innovation and impact investing and really a calling to this human integral development of the market, really furthering the social purpose of the broader investment market, it continues to be driven by Catholic institutions. So I think, I sat next to Michael Berry, the Chief Investment Officer for Georgetown, who's just taken a very big step to modify their investment policies to focus more on impact investing. So, I guess I just want to leave all of you that it's possible, that it makes a difference in real lives like Lillian, and that the market is really both has been driven by Catholic institutions who remember the kind of ultimate mission of their capital, but also continues to be driven by that as we seek to really further and scale that work. And Pat mentioned, Azure, and I think that was the last thing I want to reiterate, that one of the most important things I think that's happening here is that you're seeing a convergence of social enterprise and impact investing, and you're seeing LLCs and business structures set up specifically for the purpose of creating investable deals and creating investable pipelines that really further a particular mission. And so that, I think, was reflected in Azure, but we saw that in many different sectors, that there are these new and much more sophisticated entities coming online that give opportunities to investors from all stripes to really make impact in significant ways. So I'm going to turn it back over to John.
Great, thanks, Matt and Pat. So the only thing I would add, as far as what stood out to me, was a really strong presence that I noticed from the global south, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. Some of the participants, Matt mentioned one woman who was just really affected the room. There were others that would stand up and speak and share, particularly during the Q&A. And there was sort of this plea to say, look, we need this sort of technical assistance. We want to be doing this ourselves. We need help to do this. So there was an archbishop from Nigeria who stood up and spoke to that, essentially. And there was people that would come to him and speak. And I, for one, talked to him a while about a group that FSM supports, aid agency in Ireland, that does tremendous work around sustainable livelihoods, positive environmental impact, developed an impact fund in Eritrea and Ethiopia, highly effective. And just the idea that I can connect them to that group so that they can go and look at this community-based led effort in these communities in Eritrea and Ethiopia. He was very excited about that. I know John Kohler, who is the director of social entrepreneurship, spoke quite a bit with the Archbishop about what might be possible with his work at Santa Clara University. And so these sorts of things really led me to share that what I saw was, because it was the size it was good and bad, 125 roughly people, it allowed for a great accessibility with people around you. A large conference, that doesn't happen. But when you're in this smaller room and it's a lot of people that you suddenly can connect with, they're there to talk to and they're open and willing to do so. And so I saw that. And so that really stood out to me. The downside of that is that it would have been nice to have more people that could have been in the room, and perhaps maybe more Catholic investors. That I think the complement of those who are intermediaries or those who are working directly in social entrepreneurship or these areas, but more on the investor side, and more investors possibly from other parts of the world. Didn't see many from Asia. And so that stood out to me. But so it's that good and bad, right? It's hard to really to make it exactly right. And the last thing I would say is this sense of urgency. I heard this from Father Augusto Zampini at the very end when he spoke about the urgency of the work here. And he was pretty dramatic. He said, and bold, to say, you know, allocate 10% to impact investing, it's nothing. We need, if we talk about 40%, then we're talking about something. And I heard somebody say something about, I guess, does he understand asset allocation? But in my mind, it was like, wait, there's an attitude here. And we need to sort of be challenged by the church and this Pope and this dicastery and the Cardinal Turkson and Father Zampini to look at it differently than we have and not be so comfortable with our own models of looking at asset allocation. And so I took that away as the major takeaway, including coming back to FSM and how do we look at it even beyond what we're doing now. So those are, we'll move on after having shared that, and let's move into the next piece of our time, which is to talk about implications for Catholic Impact Investing Collaborative and Catholic Impact as well. So let's turn it back to Pat. Pat, would you like to jump in on this?
You bet. And I have a whole long list, and I am really hoping that everybody on this call will contribute ideas. And John, my heart was beating, as you said, big and bold and urgent. Those are exactly the kinds of calls to action that are huge implications for CIIC. Who else is going to do it? In our resource deep dive for taking action, we talked about a lot of resources, templates, websites, databases, but not one really focused on Catholic social teaching except CIIC. So here's our calling. Here are some of the implications, I think, most immediately for CIIC. And I'm calling on all of the people on the phone today. If you want to help us, please get in touch with us afterwards. John will tell you how, but you can go onto the website and figure it out. So first of all, go global. We're predominantly US based now, and you can look at the members of the steering committee. These are 3 out of 7 of us. The next member of the steering group will be global, whether it's sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America or whatever. We really need to reach out to our brothers and sisters across the globe and respond to what they're seeing in terms of investment opportunities. I also think that there's a great leadership role for CIIC in continuous innovation. As I said, very little focus at the convocation about how to implement these projects. Anybody can come up with innovative ideas, but it's really how you build businesses, make a profit, make it sustainable in a competitive world. And I think people on this phone are well qualified to help. People with operational expertise, investment experience, people in the pews. We can mobilize the parishes. So continuous innovation, leadership. And then I think there's a big opportunity for CIIC to track success and failure. We can learn a lot from failure. There was a lot of time spent over the last week talking about lessons learned, and in a very candid and safe way to be able to say, we tried that, it didn't work, but here's what we did to mitigate the risk, and we're willing to try it again. There's also, I think, an opportunity for CIIC to help us define scale. John just talked about big and bold and urgent, but to some people in Catholic investing, 10,000 smallholder farmers raised to maybe 100,000 smallholder farmers in 10 years is scale. And that's fine, that's good, let's get on with it. But there are also people who are talking about scaling up from maybe 1 million people to 3 million people with electricity, with clean water, with access to affordable housing in 5 years, not 10 years. So I think that the whole question of scale and what is an appropriate vehicle, whether it's the C category of grants teamed up with a B category of non-commercial to mitigate some of the early risks of the infrastructure development, and finally to the A category where you can attract the pools of billions, if not trillions, of capital. And so those are some of the things that I see as tangible ways that CIIC can move forward. The caveat, of course, is that we want to keep our neutrality. We are a place where we leave room for the Holy Spirit. We want to pray. We don't want to become a platform for marketing, but we want to become a platform for collaboration among investors that are really seeking to serve the poor. Over to you, Matt.
All right, thanks, Pat. It was a really good summary. And I think I want to just say that I think the biggest implication for CIIC is really those of you that are on the phone is being relevant and finding ways to engage you further in this work. I think the beauty and the power of this network is really in the people and those that have a common call to do more, to be bold, to advance our institutions' work in this space. And so I think we have a lot of work, I think, to do both in relevance to larger institutions. And so finding ways, I think I was struck by how many larger institutions were participating in this conference. And I think finding ways to have peer relationships between institutions that are working at very similar challenges, whether it's a culture of an investment committee or particular policies, or finding the right manager, or finding the right kind of deal source and support to do due diligence. Like, there's a lot of different things that many institutions need that I think we can be much more relevant to, and I think we're called to do that. I think both of you have shared this desire to move to more of a global institution, and I think that has a lot of really practical implications, and thankfully I think there's some energy there amongst CIIC's members, even folks that are on the call today that are working in other markets around the world, that are representing institutions that are from around the world, and so I think that bodes really well. I think one last thing is I think that there's a lot of need for support for intermediaries in this space. As more and more capital seems to be coming in, and the actual translation of that capital down to the ground, getting it into projects, having institutions that can do due diligence, that can actually source enough deals to move larger capital flows. That middle ground is still kind of the Wild West at this point in many places in the world and in many issues in the world. And so I think as CIIC members kind of come around the table and see those opportunities, I do think there's an opportunity for us to further the development of intermediaries, or to support kind of common work with intermediaries to build capacity and be able to move more capital into particular issues that we're all working on. And with that, I'll turn it back over to John.
Great, thanks, Matt. We're going to get to questions in about 3 minutes. So we've got no questions so far. So you all must be absolutely mesmerized by the three of us. Either that or you have no questions. But get them in now, and we will be ready to take those on in just a moment. So Q&A icon. The one thing that I found very encouraging is sort of the attitude of the dicastery to, and it's obviously they've shown it in all the effort, the commitment, and what they're really helping promote here in terms of Catholic impact investing. And so we did have some conversations on the side with some people there, and I have a real strong sense we have a good open channel of communication with them now. And while they're interested in learning more about CIIC, so that there's a real potential for them to serve in a role that helps us connect with those, particularly globally, that might be Catholic institutions and have an interest in being part of a community of Catholic practice. And so that was very encouraging and a wonderful takeaway, I think. And so more will be developing there in the coming months. The other thing that I noticed right off is when I would speak to people about CIIC, just side conversations, I would say 80% had a super high level of enthusiasm, that was something that they hadn't heard about before. And in describing it, they received it as this is very, very helpful and needed. And so I found that personally very encouraging, that like, okay, you know, you want to sort of put it out there. Does this make sense? You know, always challenging yourself on what you think, and then to receive that feedback, and then people being willing then to connect you to other people. It seems like we're doing something that seems to be right. And so that too was encouraging. The very last thing I'll share is that with CIIC, coming out of this, it became clear we need to do more than what we're doing now in terms of support structure within CIIC. We all are volunteers and we're all have full-time jobs. We need some level of back office support, some administrative support to help the underpin more and more what needs to happen within CIIC. And we were discussing even among CIIC participants there about how that might happen in the coming months. So more to look forward to. So with that, I think we've wrapped up that piece, and I am looking to see if we have any questions. And at this point, if my technology is working as I think it is, okay, we do have a question, and I'm just going to read it. And thanks, Greg. Did you learn? I'll just put it right out there. Did you learn about any innovative impact investment initiatives for supporting migrants and asylum seekers? So Matt, Pat, either one, jump in.
Sure. Matt, you go first, and I'll add.
I'll share. I learned quite a bit more about both Kiva and the Alight Fund have partnered on a migrant and refugee focused it's small and medium enterprise, so micro enterprise loan fund they're developing in border countries, you know, particularly around Syria and other countries where there's very significant migration challenges. That fund is a crowdsourced fund through Kiva, and they were able to prove out that refugees are no higher risk than any other clientele that they've lended to throughout their larger portfolio around the world. So they said about a 97% return of capital, and all of that's with an interest rate, I believe. So and the gentleman who runs the Alight Fund, John Kluge, he actually also has launched in partnership with a number of other folks a refugee investment network that I learned a little bit about. And so if any of you are interested in that space, there's a fair number of investors now that are kind of collaborating on that work, and I think that refugee investment network should provide some opportunities for those that are interested.
And I'll add several more. If you've heard of the group called CIIC, that's spelled K-O-I-S, based in Belgium, and they have just published their impact report, which is excellent reading. They focus particularly on some innovative ways to help Syrian refugees in the host countries of Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey. It's a social impact bond, which is now called a development impact bond. And they've launched it. It was part of a grant program on the blended finance convergence platform that I've been working with now for over 2 years. Very innovative, scalable, and it provides vocational training and other forms of support for Syrian refugees in host countries. There is also a social impact bond right here in Massachusetts, I'm delighted to say, not with the Catholics, but with the Jewish community, and they subcontract to the Catholics. So it's a great example of interfaith cooperation for the poor. Focused on immigrants and refugees, and I don't think Tracy would mind me saying that she made a commitment to expand that refugee social impact bond model to multiple other jurisdictions throughout the United States, based on the success of the Boston model. I think this is an opportunity for CIIC and also hopefully for many of you on the call today. Also, and not represented at the conference today, but Matt just mentioned John Kluge. He and this group called Refuge Point are involved with interfaith support for sustainable solutions for refugees and immigrants. Refuge Point is the name of the organization, And Catholic Charities is talking now. It's domiciled in the U.S., so CRS is not eligible to join because we only do the emerging markets. But that's yet another example of some really good support, investing support for refugees and immigrants.
Great. I'm going to blend a couple of questions here that just came in. Corrine and Jason, thank you. And these seem to relate a bit to this tension between market rate investments and those that are more impact first investments. And so the question is, sort of addresses that.
I think we've lost audio.
No, we're good.
Oh, we're good? Okay.
Okay.
So I guess the question here is, one, how do you see institutions working through that question? The idea of focusing less on the return side versus the impact side.
I can't hear.
Oh, well, so Pat, it sounds like your sound might be out, but I think, Matt, are you hearing me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, we're going to continue. We'll continue, Pat, sorry. So Matt, this idea of this, addressing this tension between the market rate and the sort of impact first side from a Catholic social teaching perspective, how might you address that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think something that came up, perhaps even an opportunity for CIIC to really work with the church and work with some scholars and theologians on really diving into this issue. I think it is an issue more and more, and as John mentioned, I think there's the hope and there's some work going on, some long time work going on around developing more documents from the church proper, from the bishops' groups, and also from the Vatican directly on how to approach this. So I think it is a tension. I think that all of us feel, I think particularly working with the lowest income communities in the world, that this concept of making returns off of the poorest of the poor can feel really wrong and can be really wrong at times. But there certainly are opportunities to provide livelihoods and to further really important work of Catholic social teaching through those kind of investments. So I think we all can learn from one another on this, and I think we can also more directly lean on folks like Father Zampini and Castri who are working through this issue right now really diligently. So we hope to certainly see more guidance on that, and we hope to be a part of guiding that. So if any of you have particular issues that you want to work through with us, I think we would all be open to CIIC diving into this and asking some folks from the church to help us work through these issues as well.
Great, thanks. One more question I think we have time for. Seamus is asking about the big Catholic institutions. How do we engage the big, the medium, and the smaller asset owners and the Catholic community? I'll just read this. Many of the latter are doing some very interesting off-grid stuff that flies below the radar. I think they need to be welcomed and engaged separately to help them develop their sea legs. Pat?
Absolutely. And Seamus, thank you so much. It's a whole question of scale. And we need everyone. And I think that you're absolutely right. There are some huge pools of capital in some of the large institutional investors. And I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but I'm trying to mobilize, for example, the Archdiocese of Boston. And one of the, and I'll be really candid about it, one of the problems is that a lot of the larger Catholic institutions separate their investment committees from their social programs. I think in light of what Father Zampini said, it's not just the 10% of your budget that goes to the sub-commercial returns, but maybe the rest of it should be looked at as well. And we need to integrate a lot of that innovative thinking into the investment committees and maybe recruit a number of the people in the parishes, in the diocese, with private equity and venture capital experience and have them participate at least in advisory committees for the archdiocese and the dioceses around the world. And listen to what the Catholic Church is doing in Africa. they don't seem to have this false dichotomy. I think they're moving ahead. I'm sure you did too, picked up a lot of ideas. Cardinal Turkson said that his diocese in Ghana is going full speed ahead. And I think that maybe some of the large dioceses in this country can learn from our brothers and sisters in Africa. Matt and John?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that I think it's right on, and I think it is a big challenge that the innovation often happens with the smallest institutions that are able to both have, I think, quicker routes to decision making. That maybe they're able to take on additional risk to really create markets. And I think the beauty of the Catholic community, and particularly the CIIC group, is that we do have that breadth of scale and that breadth of risk tolerance in this space. And so I think we have a particularly unique opportunity to put all those people literally around the same table and to be able to share. And I think this conference is a good example of that, that there are smaller institutions, even like some of the ones that we mentioned, that are very much market building. They're going in where no one's gone before and creating opportunities that hopefully will be investable, proving out points that markets like refugees do opportunities to absorb capital, to have that capital make a significant impact, and for that impact to be measured. And then institutions like Georgetown that are coming in now with really the larger assets. We have CIIC that was there in their Nuveen branch. You have very large institutional investors, multi-billion-dollar funds that are coming in behind now, the BNI Mellons of the world, the Vanguards of the world, that are, I think, ultimately able to move into that space as we prove out those points. So I do think that the relevance, again, of CIIC to larger institutions to help them work through these challenges and help them see really how far they can go and how much impact they can make is a crucial bit of work that we need to do over the coming year. And I think we rely a lot on what John had mentioned about building out the infrastructure to be able to share resources and gather people and connect conversations into action in a way that a volunteer group or just a loosely affiliated might struggle to do.
Great. Thank you both for that, and thank you all for your questions. We are near the top of the hour, and so we're going to wrap it up. And in wrap up, first of all, Matt and Pat, thank you so much for joining in today and providing such rich sharing of what we all saw at the conference, and also our own personal takeaways and what we saw as key moments. Just a few things for you folks. This has been recorded. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available online on our website sometime next week. So I expect we'll send out a update to anyone who is receiving our updates, who signed up for those. And so you can then share that link with others. So let others know if you think this is something that they would receive benefit from. Checking out the recording. Other things moving on ahead for CIIC, we will have another gathering, a regional gathering. We had one already in May in Boston, one in San Francisco as well later in May, that were very, very well attended and I think successful. The next one will be in Chicago. It'll be sometime between Labor Day and mid-September. We should have that scheduled sometime next week. If you have any interest, please reach out, let me know. And the way you can reach out to me or any member of the steering committee is go to our website, check out, we have all of our emails there listed. Feel free to reach out to me or any of the CIIC steering committee members with any questions of follow-up. If you have any stories that you'd like to share, we'll continue to feature new Catholic impact investing stories from institutions in the coming months. Any future conversations that we have around webinars as well. And if you just like to have a side conversation, we welcome that. More and more has happened already with CIIC just through these side conversations. And so please, please, please reach out. Do not hesitate to do so. So with that, we will let you go on with the rest of your day. And again, thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you